Okay, this is a lecture on the second aorist. This is a second pathway to the past tense. The meaning of the aorist in both the first and the second is the same. Just because you have two forms of the aorist doesn't mean there's two different meanings. It's the same for both. So the time of action for the aorist is past time, but the kind of action, specifically the aspect, is perfective. Now, what does that mean again? Perfective action is action that's viewed as complete or as a whole. And when we're thinking about aorist action as a whole, we're thinking of the beginning, the end, and everything in between. So think of it like that. Think of it like holistic action, a big circle, beginning and end, and everything in between. The aorist tense kind of covers that whole process. As I mentioned last class, the aorist can be formed in two different ways in Greek. The first aorist, which we learned last week, so this is luo, and the first aorist is elu sa, so augment, verb stem, tense formative, sigma alpha, and this is the first singular form, so it's a zero ending. It's just the tense formative, sigma alpha. Okay? But the second aorist is formed slightly differently. It has the augment, that's the common element, and it has a connecting vowel and personal endings on the end. This is the verb stem, and this is the verb lambano. So you can see that this is the lexical form, the present form, but the second aorist tense stem is slightly different. It's similar. You see the lambda, you see the alpha, you see the beta here, but it's missing some letters. There's a difference. And so that's the one thing that we're going to learn about the second aorist. The tense stem, the verb tense stem that's used in the second aorist to form it is different from its lexical form or its present active form. Now the aorist, verbs in the aorist will either form their aorist according to the pattern of the first aorist or the second aorist, not both. While there's one exception, for the most part, this is true for the Greek language. So a verb will either be first aorist or second aorist. So a logical question is, why do we have a second aorist? Isn't a first aorist enough? And of course, this is a question that I've asked for years and years and years. Life would be easier if we just had first aorist because it's so simple, right? Augment, verb stem, sigma alpha, and endings. Very easy. And we can see that verb stem is similar to the lexical form. But second aorist, you still get an augment, but the stem is different. So you have to make that logical, thoughtful link between the aorist verb stem and the lexical form. It's not so easy. That's what makes the second aorist a bit difficult. But you know, language is never easy. In English, there are various ways to form the past tense. For instance, the basic way that we learn as kids is add an ed on the end. I study in the present, I studied in the past. Just add an ed. But that rule of adding an ed is different for certain verbs. For instance, I eat in the present, I ate in the past tense. So there's some internal stem changes that happen to the verb stem when that moves to the past tense. We don't say, I eated. Or the common mistake that we hear little kids make is, I go in the present, or I goed in the past. We add an ed. No, I went. Well, that's because this verb to go has a different tense stem, a different tense root completely in the history of the language that's not etymologically related to the ancient verb go. So that's what's happening here, and that's what happens in the second Aorist. Well, Greek's the same way. It has various ways to form the past tense, specifically the Aorist. The first Aorist, elusa, and the second Aorist, so going from lego to its past tense, we have apon. How do we make that link? Well, we can't make it etymologically. We can't say that lego is derived, or apon's derived from lego, because it's from a different verbal root altogether. We can't make an etymological link between lego and apon, because apon, this form, comes from a completely different verbal root that has just come in to the language family of lego and has taken its past tense up. So that's what's happening with the second Aorist. Let's look at the parts, or the component parts of the second Aorist, or the morphology. So what are the components? We have an augment, we have a tense stem, there's a connecting vowel, and then there's secondary personal endings. So la, bon. Okay? Augment, tense stem, connecting vowels, personal endings. Elabon is I took or they took. So it's first singular or third plural. Let's talk a little bit about this second aorist verb stem. The second aorist verb stem will always have a different stem from the present or the lexical form. It will always look different, and that's what makes the second aorist tricky. Let's look, for instance, and compare the imperfect versus the second aorist of lego. So this is lego. The imperfect is elegon. So notice that. Augment and endings. And this verb stem, leg, looks like the present, or the present tense stem, or the lexical form. Apon, however, is completely different. So that's what's happening here. The imperfect we can easily link back to the lexical form. The second aorist form is not so easy. So that's why, for the most part, you'll be memorizing these second aorist tense stems and seeing how they relate meaning-wise to the lexical form. Here's an example of second aorist with different verb stems altogether. So lego, imperfect elegon, second aorist stem apon. Erkomai, erx amen, that's the imperfect, aelthon. Blepo, I see, ablepson, ablepon, the imperfect. Adon is the second aorist. Estheo is I eat. Estheon, aestheon is the imperfect, and phagon. So what are you noticing there? These imperfects we can link back to the present tense form, the present tense lexical form, quite easily. We can see the relationship between them, just with the addition of the augment, but we can see the tense stem, basic tense stem, at work within the form. However, the second aorist in all these cases is completely different. That's because, again, there was a different verb root that took the place of the second aorists of lego, erkomai, blepo, and estheo, and just filled in for them. So apon is I said, aelthon is I went, or I came. Adon is I saw, and ephagon is I ate. These are second aorist that have minor alterations only. There's not a completely different verb root at play, but it's just that the present tense form, the lexical form, which we know, is slightly different in the second aorist. So this is the verb I kill, apathenesko, here's the imperfect, apatheneskon. Okay, we can see the relationship between, there's the augment, but we see the relationship between these two. We kind of see similarities here, apathenon. Okay, we see the ap, the theta, and the nu, but all this stuff in between has changed dramatically. Okay, apathenon. Ballo, I throw, ballon is the imperfect. We can see the relationship. And there's a slight difference here. Ballon, one lambda is gone. So it goes down to a single lambda. That's only a minor change, but it's noteworthy, right? That you don't get the imperfect and the aorist mixed up when there's one lambda difference. Genomai, I become. We see, and it's a middle only, we see in the imperfect again amen, okay, augment. We see the basic stuff in the verb root, and of course the middle endings. What's happening over here? Again amen. So one letter difference, and epsilon in here instead of the iota. So the verb stem for the aorist is gen, for genomai, and that's I became. Genosko, I know. Genoskon, again we can see the relationship between the imperfect and the present. The second aorist form looks very similar. We see the gamma, the nu, and the omega, agnon. Okay, I knew. I have a slide at the very end showing you Gnosko's second aorist in a little more detail because it can be quite tricky. But nevertheless, slight changes happen. And finally, our kind of paradigm vowel for learning, or verb for learning the second aorist, lambano. Lambanon is the imperfect. Again, we can see the form of the verb here. But elabon. So similarities, we see a lambda, a beta, a lambda alpha and a beta. But again, the verb stem is slightly different. So again, these you have to be aware of and commit them to memory. So let's walk through the second aorist active form of lambano. So elabon, elabez, elabe, elabomin, elabeta, elabon. So the thing about these endings here is that you've already learned them with the imperfect. You've learned this pattern with when we learn the imperfect. It's just the same set of endings for the second aorist. So you're not really learning a new set of endings. In fact, I talk about kind of primary endings, primary personal endings that are used in the present and the future, and maybe secondary endings that are used in the imperfect and the aorist. So just be aware of that there are kind of similarities between the sets of endings that you're learning. Here's the middle, and for the middle I've used genomai, which is a middle only verb. It takes the middle endings because the activity of becoming is kind of subject involved. So aganomen, aganu, aganeto, aganomatha, aganestha, aganonto. And remember aganu. Aganu is this way because you have an epsilon and a so coming together. The sigma drops and the epsilon and the omicron become an omicron upsilon. So that's why you get that ending there with the second singular of the middle of these secondary endings. So all these are kind of past tense. Agonomen, I became. Simple past, I became. Agonu, you became. Ageneto, he, she, it became. Agonomatha, we became. Agonesta, you, plural, became. Agenonto, they became. So here's a specific slide on gnosko. And gnosko is treated differently here because, for a couple of reasons. First of all, it ends with that omega on the stem. So the connecting vowels, which we normally would see here, omicron, epsilon, epsilon, omicron, epsilon, and omicron, these guys get pushed out of the way by the big omega. The omega is this powerful vowel. So it pushes the connecting vowels. So basically the connecting vowels don't exist here for this form of gnosko. It's just the personal endings. So nu, sigma, a zero ending with no movable nu, men, te, and san. This is the other unusual one, right? We would fully expect agonon to just have a nu, like the normal pattern, but this is a case where it's taken up an ending that looks a lot like the first Aorist, third plural, san. So that's the one little difference with gnosko. And finally, there are some alternative second Aorist spellings that we see for certain verbs. So the normal third person plural is apon, aelthon, adon. An alternative third plural here is apan, aelthan, adan. So you see the alpha is showing up here to make a difference. So just be aware of that, but they only happen a small amount of time, like this 95 times, 5 times, 5 times. So it doesn't happen much. I'm going to walk through some examples of second Aorists. This is from John 3, verse 2. Hutos eilthen pros auton, nuktos kai apen auto. He came to him at night, is the word for night, and he said to him. Okay, so you get two second Aorist there. Eilthen is third singular, and its lexical form is erkomai. Apen, it's another third singular, and its lexical form is lego. So to come or to go, to say. Here's another example. Kai te hemera, te trite gamos ageneto, and kana tes Galileas. And on the third day, there was a gamos, a wedding in Cana of Galilee. Okay, so ageneto, third singular, talking about the gamos, and it's from genomai. There was, and I've translated was there, because that's kind of the idea here. It's the word of becoming, but it's also a verb used of happening. And finally, from the baptism narrative in Mark's Gospel. Kai ageneto en akenais tais hemerais eilthen Jesus apo Nazareth tes Galileas kai e baptisthein eis ton eordanein hupa ewano. Third singular from genomai. Again, a middle only. It came to pass in those days that Jesus came, okay, eilthen, from Nazareth of Galilee, and he was baptized in the Jordan River by John. So this guy is an Aorist passive. So this is an example of baptizo. Baptizo, the zeta is gone, and you get the sigma and the theta eta. So that's a third singular, and it's an aorist passive. He was baptized in the Jordan River, and their agency is expressed by hupo ewanu. Well, that's everything for now with the second aorist. So keep studying Greek, and we'll see you in class.